on that tape measure and move the strength of gravity 1 inch in either direction, proportionally, we go out of existence. But the problem is the tape measure doesn't go from that wall to this front wall. It goes across the entire known universe. You change gravity that much in the entire known universe, we don't exist. For you Navy people out here, I was in the Navy for many years. Think of an aircraft carrier. If you take an aircraft carrier like the John Stennis or the Ronald Reagan, which displaces 110,000 tons, has a runway on it that's about 3 lengths of a football field, has 5,000 to 6,000 people on it, several stories high. If you were to change the weight of that aircraft carrier by less than a trillionth the weight of an electron, it would be uninhabitable if the aircraft carrier was the universe. That's how incredibly designed the universe is. Arno Penzias again said,
all right, let me look at something here. This video was posted May 23rd, 2011. I've watched a lot of Frank Turek's more recent work, and he still does this to this day. That's not a bad point. The problem is it's only half a point. Because what does that even mean? If we change the universe wouldn't exist if we changed it by a little bit. Well, the universe does exist. That's all the evidence we need. The problem is probability. The problem isn't that God is an obvious step from this. The problem isn't that it's a necessary conclusion that God exists from this. The problem is that it is a probabilistic conclusion. And he doesn't address that ever. Even 11 years later, he never seems to mention that. And I don't know why, because that's the crux of the argument. That's the point. I don't know what the actual is. Like 1 in 100,000 million, I think, was the probability he gave. Let's see.
We wouldn't be here. The universe would not have expanded, or it would have collapsed. Atheist Steven Weinberg put it this way. He said, life as we know it would be impossible if any one of several physical quantities had slightly different values. There are dozens of these quantities. One of them, as Stephen Hawking identified, was this. He said that if the universe, or if the expansion rate of the universe changed by 1 part in 100,000 million a second.
Okay, 1 part in 100,000 million. Let me see if I can draw that. Sticky notes. Note. Let's see. Alright. Alright. There's some math homework on here. Let's see if I can erase it from helping my nephew. This was, gosh, it was a long time ago. Okay. Add page. There we go. And draw. Voice. I don't want voice. Ah, jeez. How do you draw with this stupid thing? Highlight. Heading. Draw. There we go. Okay. Alright. Let's see if we can... One part in 100,000 million million. One, two, three. That's the probability. That's the probability of that happening. Now, at this point in time, you have two choices. Because this number, as a probability, for all intents and purposes, is impossible in one attempt. For all practical purposes, this is a meaningless number. That is 0, is what that is. We're just talking about gravity here. Alright? Just talking about gravity. So, there are several natural laws. There are several that have to be perfectly as they are now with that kind of scaling. It might be different for some of them, but they're all those kind of stupid numbers. It's not possible to do that in one attempt. You get another one like that. So here's how this works. Let's see. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 16, 17. That's 1 times 10 to the 16th. That's what that number is. It's 1 over 1 times 10 to the 16th. You get another one of these. Let's say it's something more reasonable. There's a 1 in 1,000 chance. This is how probability works. You got 2 of these. One of them is 1 in 1,000 chance. One of them is 1 in 1 times 10 to the 16th. Probability, you multiply them. And you get 1 in 1 times 10 to the 19th. And I want to say there's at least a dozen of these natural laws. Strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, gravity, the speed of light. There's several of these. But let's just weak nuclear force, strong nuclear force, gravity, and the speed of light. Let's just say those 4. Those 4. They all have to be within a range, like a stupid range like this, to be accurate. But let's just say the other 3 are 1 in 1,000 and not 1 in hundreds of thousands like they actually are. They're just 1 in 1,000. That's 2 more at 1 in 1,000. That's 1 in 1 times 10 to the 22nd, 25th. That's 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the probability of the law of gravity plus 3 other laws at 1 in 1,000 chance, which is way better than what they actually are. The odds of that happening are just surreally nonsense. It's just nonsense. Like, what's the Planck length? How big is the Planck length? Actually, what? All right. The Planck length is 1 over 1. This is 35 zeros. It's like 16 followed by 34 zeros. All right. This is 26 zeros. The Planck length is not far from the Planck length, and I'm pretty sure the odds are actually, it's like, oh my gosh, it's logarithmically more improbable than this. And this isn't evolution. The universe had, well, I'm going to say the universe had one chance, but people are going to push back on that, and with good reason. Good-ish reason. So, the only, is only two alternatives to there being God. If this is the only evidence we have of anything, there's two alternatives to this being God. One alternative is the multiverse, and one alternative is the expanding and contracting big crunch theory. Basically, the universe gets to a certain size, and then the power of gravity forces it to come back together, and it never actually reaches singularity. It just comes close enough that it gets so hot and so dense that it explodes again, and it just does that over and over again. So the problem is for the universe to do that repeatedly for an eternity. First of all, it is nonsense. You can't go an eternity into the past. It's not just nonsense. It's it's absurd to go an eternity into the past. And this is how come Frank Turek does these videos and not me, because he's way less wordy than me. I'm taking forever to explain this, which is why he didn't bring this up in a debate, but he never brings it up anywhere. You can't have an infinite expand and contract. There had to have been an initial expansion. And then, if that initial expansion blew up and came back in, it would have to blow up to the same size, collapse to the same point, and explode the exact same way every single time in order for that to continue on into eternity. But we're seeing two problems with that. One, the problem is that the universe is currently accelerating. It's not just expanding, it's accelerating. It's not expanding at the same rate. It's not expanding at an increasingly slow rate. It's not reducing speed. It's accelerating. It's expanding faster and faster and faster and faster. So we have no evidence whatsoever of any contraction ever. Certainly no evidence that it will contract at any point in the future. So, with the way that model is just too perfect to be realistic. The alternative models show a universe that explodes out, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it bounces out into a point where you get a universe that never collapses. That had to have had an initial bounce. You still get the problem of the universe being nothing at an infinitely dense point at some point in the past, even if that past is so long ago that it's not these kind of numbers long ago. If we're talking we're at one of the longer ends of one of those bounces. 13 billion years. That means the first universe only lasted a few billion years. Second universe lasted a few more billion years. Third universe lasted 8 billion years, then 10 billion years, then 11. So we're at close to 14 billion years now. So this can only happen some derivative of 14 billion years. So we're not talking these kind of numbers, right? We're only talking a few billion chances. So this is a billion. If we had 14 previous universes, 14 billion previous universes, we would need this to happen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16. Like, we would need, if we had a billion attempts at the universe, these are the kind of numbers we need, and none of the mathematical none of the mathematical models demonstrate that being likely. The only other option is the multiverse. And I'm sorry, I'm going to take a break. I'll be back in about 2.5 to 3 minutes. But multiverse, if you're saying it could be the multiverse, okay. It's you got God of the gaps and you got multiverse of the gaps, same argument. There's no evidence whatsoever anywhere for a multiverse. None. Not the slightest bit. There is some positive evidence for God. There is zero positive evidence for a multiverse. None whatsoever. It's just an idea somebody had. It's not even a theory. It's just a hypothesis. There's not even the slightest bit of experiment we could even do at this point. Alright, I gotta take a 3-minute break. Listen to some pretty awesome music while I'm gone. And I'll get on to the next point while I'm getting the music set up. So I almost made the same mistake Christopher Hitchens did. But the point isn't that these odds are that small. It's the fact that compared to the probability of a creator. So let's check this out real quick. The probability of universe happening in this way, like this, if it is intentionally created and designed by a vastly intelligent being, this is the probability of that happening. Every single time it's tried, it's going to happen. Every time, without fail. If I set off a grenade in an auto shop, eventually, possibly, it could assemble some kind of car parts. But if I put a mechanic in a car shop, first try, car parts assembled. Every time. So, few-minute break, and then we're going to get on to the next part of the debate. Alright, sorry about that. Wife asked me to bring her some popcorn. Figured popcorn was a good idea. Popcorn and chaos. Actually, I think I left that muted. So y'all didn't even get to see, get to hear cool music while I was gone. Excellent. I screwed up. Alright. Well, we're going to close out this note. So, but just real briefly, the probability of the laws of physics being what they are so small, and there's no reason why they needed to be what they were. Like, at the Big Bang, there were certain attributes of that explosion, of the stretch, and the universal expansion, that caused those laws to be what they are. They are not necessary. They're not like the laws of logic, where they're necessary facts of science. The speed of light didn't need to be what it is. The gravitational constant didn't need to be what it is. It could have been any number of different values, and if there was anything different about the way the universe expanded initially, they would have been different. So that probability, it's not that the probability of those things is so bad, because if you have an infinite amount of time, whatever, it's that compared to the probability of it happening if it's done on purpose. The probability of me dealing out a certain set of cards in a certain order from a deck of cards is 1 in 52 times 50 times 1 in 52. 1 in 52 to the 52nd power, or something like that. It's stupid. Yeah, because there's 52 unique cards, and you gotta lay out 52 cards. So it's 1 in 52. That's what it is. It's 1 in 52 factorial is what it is. Something like that. The probability of a deck of cards. 42 factorial. Jeez, now I'm screwing myself up. It's 1 in 52 times 1 in 51 times 1 in 50 times 1 in 49 times whatever the inverse of factorial is. That's what the probability is. So it's crazy what the odds are. But if I sit down and I take a deck of cards and I intentionally lay them out in that order, it's going to happen every time you give me a deck of cards and ask me to do it. I'm going to do it the same way every time. So, yeah, things that are insanely improbable can be consistent if an intelligence is doing it on purpose. And he never makes that connection between those two things. He just leaves the argument half made. And I know it's probably because I just took a solid, God knows, half an hour to make that claim. There's no reason for you to but Frank Turek is much more better at the brevity than I am, which is why I'm doing these YouTube videos and he's debating. So anyway, I just wanted to get that out there before I continue on. That's my first big criticism of Frank Turek. Now, there's not a whole lot I can criticize him on as far as responses go, because it's he's the initial opening statement. I don't think I expected that. He's the initial opening statement, so there's not much to respond to other than the fact that he made half a point. But again, like he said, he only had 20 minutes. So if this was in isolation, I wouldn't even be criticizing that. But 11 years later, I've still never heard him, tie those two things together, the probability of those things happening versus the probability of intelligence doing it. I've never heard him actually connect those dots. uh, in 11 years since this debate. So um, that's kind of the criticism I have, is that he doesn't very clearly connect those dots. Now I'm probably going to say more about Christopher Hitchens. I'm probably going to interrupt him more. Now I think about it, and that's because Frank Turek is making opening statements, and it's not very easy to criticize opening statements. They're just a bunch of claims. So it's a lot easier to criticize responses. So I'm probably going to be a little harsh uh, on Hitchens, but I'm hoping to be harsher on Turek when his response time comes. So I'm going to grab the popcorn and we're going to get rolling on this one more time.
And after the Big Bang, we wouldn't be here. The universe would not have expanded, or it would have collapsed back on itself, or it never would have created galaxies. That's how precisely designed the Big Bang event was.
Sorry. Okay.
Not only was the Big Bang event precisely designed, so are many constants about our universe right now. If you change the gravitational force by 1 part in 10 to the 40, we wouldn't be here. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40? Illustration. Take a tape measure, stretch it from that back wall to the front wall in inches. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least believable. I'm sorry I'm out of time, but I did the best I could. Cosmos, thank you very much.
Thank you. Now our second speaker, Christopher Hitchens.
I have no local boy roots. I am a Navy brat, however. Commander Hitchens of Portsmouth. I'd like to assure you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, that that isn't the best that Frank can do. He ended with that pious hope. He must indeed hope it isn't. I've seen him do better in his 20 minutes. He barely got his trousers off, as a matter of fact, before he had to sit down, because he didn't get beyond deism. I don't think he even intended much to get beyond deism. If there was a word adeist, it would describe me probably rather better than the vulgar word atheist does. I don't have a special word for saying why I don't believe in Santa Claus, for example, or why I don't believe in the tooth fairy, or why I don't believe in astrology. I don't need a special word for that. I assume, with me, you assume that these are fairy tales, man-made fables, either for the frightening or the amusement of, depending on need, children. I don't believe there is a supernatural dimension, and I don't believe there have ever been any miracles, so I don't believe that prayers are answered. I don't believe any of this. None of this comes up so far in this argument. I'm not arguing with a religious person yet at all. I'm arguing with someone who claims to know more than I do about physics and biology. It's possible that he does. Many, many people do. But bear in mind that we cannot say that we know that there was not a prime mover. It's not within our compass. Pitifully ignorant as we are, only scrabbling on the lower slopes of the study of physics, as all of us are, even the best, we may not say that we know there was no prime mover. We may not say that. We can say that all the laws appear to operate without that assumption. It's very, very, very rare indeed to meet a physicist of any standing, from Einstein onwards, who is not at the most a Spinozist. In other words, someone who might say there could be a pantheism somewhere, there could be a force, but there is no way you can take a step from the laws of physics, the observable creation of the cosmos, that leads you to the belief that there is an intervening personal God who does answer prayers, who does watch over you, who does notice what you're up to, who does mind what you do, who you sleep with, and in what position, what you eat and on what days of the week, what propitiations and sacrifices you will make, what commandments you will observe. There is...
I'm an idiot. I left my mic off. I'm sorry. All right. So, what I said is that Turek, again to his discredit, and Hitchens, to his credit, Hitchens is breezing past that point that I made. And he's not breezing past it because Hitchens is being disingenuous. He's breezing past it because Turek didn't make it. He didn't make that connection. He's saying there's no connection between the laws of physics and a personal God that actually cares about how you brush your teeth at night. There is a connection. That connection is 1 over 10, 1 times 10 to the 25th versus 1 over 1. The reason he's not making that connection is the reason Hitchens isn't making that connection, specifically, is that he's just made the claim just a minute ago that we don't need God to explain the laws of physics. That may be true. You don't need God to explain anything, because I can explain the laws of physics with stories about unicorns and fairy tales and Santa Claus, just like he said. I can explain the world that way. So I don't need God to explain it. But that's not the question. The question isn't whether or not we need God to explain the universe. The question is, what's the probability? What's the most likely? And the most likely is that the probability of God is so infinitely more probable than the probability of not God. And just that connection alone means that, yeah, we kind of do need God to explain the world if we want to be on the side of probability and rationality. God is the most rational explanation of those numbers. Now, is it possible that God doesn't exist? Yeah, it's possible. In the same way it's possible for monkeys to bang out Hamlet on a typewriter totally on accident. It's possible. Anything's theoretically possible. There's nothing that violates the laws of logic to say that, God doesn't need to exist, but it's not the most rational or the most probable explanation. So, anyway, Turek didn't make that point, so Hitchens gets a pass and breezing over it. That's, again, a knock on Turek, not Hitchens.
There's no possible way, no one's even tried it, of getting from the laws of physics or biology to any such idea. So from the person who says, I'm a deist, I don't think all of this can be an accident, there must be some cosmic force, I say, I can't disprove it, though I think the cosmos functions without it, but you have all your work, sir, or ma'am, still ahead of you.
See, I think the cosmos functions without it. That's exactly what I was just talking about. It's like, I can't argue against it, though I think the cosmos functions without it. No, it doesn't. I mean, it could. Theoretically, it's possible the cosmos could function without it. But the probability says that's so far from the most rational observation or explanation that it's actually absurd. So, that's the point. Again, the point that Turek didn't make.
Before you can say that Jesus of Nazareth was a real person, let alone that he was the Son of God, let alone that his mother was a virgin, let alone that he was resurrected, none of these things, by the way, would prove he was the Son of God, if they did happen, nor would they prove that his doctrines were not erroneous. A resurrected person who was the son of a virgin could still be talking nonsense. There's no logic that says he must be right. If I'm having an argument with you, sir, and you say, you lose, boy chick, I say, how come? Because my mother never went to bed with another man. Your logic is faulty. I think my case could remain just as strong as ever it was. In default of that, I must say, rather bizarre intervention. Now, why do we have religion in the first place? Why are we having this discussion? Why does Frank feel the need to talk in this way? Because we are pattern-seeking mammals. It's part of our evolution. We look for patterns. We're designed to look for them. And if we can't find a good explanation, we'll come up with a bad one, rather than none at all. Most
I need to get in the habit of that better. Hitchens said that we're designed. Those words came out of his mouth. I know that's not the point he was trying to make, but we're designed to find patterns. Come on. You're not helping your point, dude. Fix your argument.
People would rather have a conspiracy theory than no theory. It's very observable that. There's a lot of junk science around before good science arrives. Before we have astronomy, we have astrology. Before we have chemistry, we have alchemy. All of these things are derivatives of religion, because in a very sinister verse of the Bible that used to upset me when I was being forced to listen to it as a little boy, it says, "Seek and ye shall find." Yes, that's exactly right. Seek and you will find. Seek for an explanation of volcanic eruptions when you're living in a primitive society, and you will think they're probably a visitation from an angry deity.
I'm sorry. Can't let that go. Seek and you will find is the reason why we discovered tectonic plates. And yet here he's saying that, oh, it's obvious that that's the reason why we believed in stupid deities. Nah, dude. Christianity is the mother of science and the mother of universities. Because of those kind of verses. Wrestle with God, seek and find. The word Israel it actually means wrestle with God. As opposed to Islam, which means service to God or submission to God, I think is what Islam means. Israel means wrestle with God. So, I mean, it's a catchy point, but it's not one that exists and that is reflective of the actual reality of the Christian religion or even the Jewish religion. So,
and if you're told you can postpone the next eruption by throwing a few live babies into the lava down the crater, that's what you'll do. Religion has just started. Religion has just begun. Why do some people get the plague and others not? Because they're sinful. Where's the plague coming from in the first place? It's a punishment from God, and or, in early Christian society, the Jews have poisoned the wells. So we'll go and get them. Again. Because we already hate them because they killed our Redeemer. They committed deicide. All of them did. All of them. No one's exempt. Indeed, if you have to be a Christian, it's an article of their faith that we were all present at Calvary. We all drove in the nails, the Jews particularly so. And we all have to expiate this guilt for a crime that may or may not have been committed, but if it was committed before we were born. What is this?
it's not in Christian doctrine at all. This is purely ad hoc. This is bad argument. None of that he said, all of that's nonsense. Have there been Christians that were anti-Semitic and hated Jews because they killed Christ? Yeah. There have been. Were they ever a significant majority? Maybe in the Dark Ages, when most people couldn't read? Certainly not now. Certainly not at any point in our religious teachings. The Jews especially so. Quote for quote what he just said. Not a part of any Christian doctrine. I've been to a wide spread of Christian churches, widespread of denominations, Catholic and Protestant. No one teaches that. So, yeah, that's an argument from ignorance.
It's not physics, okay? It's not biology. It's not science. It's faith. Why don't you fly under your true flag, sir? Why don't you say these things must be believed as articles of faith? Don't try and derive it from science. Now, I can't improve on the argument that David Hume came up with, against the idea of the supernatural, against the idea that the laws of nature are occasionally suspended in order to make people's faith a little more secure. Ambrose Bierce, in his Devil's Dictionary, you may remember, says under prayer, under P for prayer, prayer. A request that the laws of nature be suspended in favor of the petitioner, himself admittedly unworthy. David Hume puts it a little more acidly than that. He says, if you see the laws of nature apparently suspended, perhaps a virgin's given birth, perhaps a leper has suddenly stopped being a leper, who knows what it might be, you know the sort of thing, you have to ask yourself one of two things. Well, actually you have to ask yourself both. Which is the more probable, that the laws of nature have just been suspended or that I am under a misapprehension? That's if you are an eyewitness yourself to the morning. If you're hearing about it second, third, fourth, and fifth hand, you have to ask this question with redoubled and trebled and quadrupled force. And the likelihood is which? That the laws of nature were suspended or that somebody maybe garbled, maybe a rumor got around. If you make this assumption, then nothing is mysterious about reality. Nothing is mysterious at all. It would explain why everyone seems to die and no one comes back. No longer a mystery about that. It would explain why some people are cured of leprosy and other even worse diseases if they go to the doctor, and if that doctor has access to certain kinds of drugs, but not if they don't. The great theologian Lancelot Andrewes, Archbishop of Canterbury, during the Black Death, wondered. He said, it seems odd to me. There are people who go to church and pray, and they give their tithes, and they do everything that they're supposed to do, and they lead godly lives, and yet they seem to die of the plague just as much as the sinners do. He went to his grave, the Archbishop, not realizing that he'd very nearly stumbled on a very good point. After all, the discussion before us this evening is what explains reality better? Well, I think my explanation is probably, so far, not the inferior one. I've seen myself the fabrication of a religion or of a religious figure. I've seen it done before my very eyes in the case of the...
He hasn't made any positive arguments at all. And he says that his explanation is better. He hasn't made an explanation. He has alluded to an explanation that he has already claimed, but this is not the time. This is a criticism of his debate technique, not of his belief system. He hasn't made a point. He hasn't made a point. All he's done is attack Christianity. A lot of it has been ad hoc, but he has not done anything to present his own alternative evidence for anything. So to say that your viewpoint is better is fine, but this is a debate, my dude. What's your viewpoint? Give us some evidence for what you believe. That's the point. But he's not providing any alternative evidence to refute anything that Turek said.
The fraudulent woman calling herself Mother Teresa, though she certainly was a virgin and never had any children, and actually named Agnes Bujashu, an Albanian crook who...
Mother Teresa wasn't a name she gave herself. Just like Father in the church, Mother is a title. And yes, she was a crook. It's the whole point of the Christian faith. Sorry. It's really hard to listen to bullshit. Sorry, Hitchens. But you're going off the reservation, dude. I didn't think I was going to have to interrupt this much.
Worked in Calcutta, who was considered by those who read only the newspapers as a friend of the poor, but was in fact a friend of an advocate for poverty. She believed poverty was a gift from God, that suffering ennobled people. She didn't believe in this for herself, for poverty, because she took several $1 million from, among other people, the Duvalier family in Haiti, probably the most cruel deceivers and oppressors of the poor in the late 20th century, from the Charles Keating savings and loan racket in California, the so-called savings and loan scandal, from many, many other depraved rich persons, and used the money to build not a teaching hospital in Calcutta or a clinic, or for the relief of poverty or hunger or disease or anything of the sort, but to build over 150 convents in her own name to found an order that would glorify and magnify herself. And that's where the money went.
I'll have to look into that. But that's not why I paused it. I didn't actually pause it to contradict this. I don't know anything about that. That might be true. This is the first thing he has presented any evidence for. Like, alternative argument for. And it contradicts nothing Frank Turk said. That would have been a good argument if this had been a part of the topic at all. At all. Just...
Since then, we are asked to believe by His Holiness the Pope, the lately named formerly named Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, that because of an intercession by her posthumously, that a woman in Bengal named Monica was cured of a tumor just by praying and putting a picture of Mother Teresa on the swelling in her stomach. I can assure you that's not how tumors go away. Ladies and gentlemen, I can also assure you the last thing India needs is to be told that its people, when they're ill, should go to faith healers and shamans, and the enormous number of witch doctors, crooks, and charlatans who there are in the subcontinent. Many people will die if they follow this kind of advice. And the doctors in the case have already testified, before anyone else could be heard from, that they understand perfectly what medicine they gave her, how she responded to treatment, how normal the disorder was, how predictable was the recovery. But you're going to be told quite soon from St. Peter's Square in Rome that this was a miracle and it fulfills the conditions for this terrible woman to be made into a saint. I watched every stage of this. I saw it happen. I went to Calcutta. I've talked to, interviewed people who were concerned in the miracle case. I was asked myself by the Vatican to come and testify against the ridiculous canonization and beatification of this woman. I know how religion gets started, and it gets started because we like our illusions, and because the world, the realm of illusion, is very, very precious to us. But again, the matter for this evening is, does deism, theism, or atheism best explain reality? And once again, I don't think my explanation fails.
Again, he hasn't given an explanation. Your explanation may not fail, but you haven't presented it to us, so we don't know. I'm not a massive follower of Christopher Hitchens, so I don't actually know. Like, I'm not being facetious or disingenuous here. I don't actually know what his explanation for all this is. All I know is that he's anti-Christian. And let's assume, for the sake of argument, that everything he said about Mother Teresa is true. All that proves is that there are corrupt people in the Catholic Church. The fact that there are corrupt people in the Catholic Church doesn't disprove anything. They don't have any effect on God's existence or non-existence whatsoever. They don't have any effect on the believability or authenticity of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ whatsoever. It has no bearing on the current argument. The current argument, as stated, is atheism or creationism, or theism or atheism, which better explains the universe. So Christianity is not part of the title at all, which is how come Frank Turk didn't address it. But he's hyper-focused on Christianity because he's attacking Christianity rather than defending his own point. He needs to defend his own point. And if he can't, I'm probably not going to watch any more debates by Christopher Hitchens because these are bad. I mean, I hate to say that. I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but this is not good. He's not making a good argument in defense of his own belief. I don't even know what it is yet. I have some assumptions about what he believes, but he's already obliterated a couple of those. He's made it flat out clear that he doesn't think what I thought he thought. So, but he hasn't said what he does thought, just what he doesn't think. So again, I don't know what the position is that he's arguing for. He's not making an argument for anything. All he's doing is defaming the character of particular Christians. But that, again, perfectly commensurate with the Christian religion. In fact, it's what the Christian religion teaches. So I'm not sure where he's going with this, and I'm going to try a little harder not to interrupt.
How am I doing for time?
8 minutes.
Bloody good. This question of the beginning of things is, of course, very important. And if you think that it must have had a beginner as well as a beginning, that it's not just a design or an apparent design, but it must have had a designer, you are only asking for another question to be asked.
Apparent
Who
design.
created this creator?
That's better.
Who designed this designer? Who fixed up this prime mover? Who was the prime mover for that prime mover? The common word for this in logic and some philosophy courses is it's an infinite regression. It doesn't really get you anywhere, but as I say,
Another good point.
it wouldn't get you to religion, even if you could prove that there must have been a prime mover. It wouldn't get you to the worship of other human beings as if they were prophets.
I just want to say, I'm actually glad, because he's actually getting to the point here. Instead of just ad hoc attacking individual Christians or making fun of the concept of Christianity, he's actually making points now. And I kind of got excited, and I kind of wanted to give him props. Hopefully I can take back what I just said a minute ago.
Or saviors or redeemers. It can't help you get there. You have to believe that as a matter of faith or not. You can't do it from physics. There's furthermore, I think, an almost insuperable ontological problem involved here. Suppose it to be true. Suppose that I concede it. Suppose there must be such a designer or an individual, an intelligence, something like a person that does this. How could I know it? Which person is smarter, sufficiently smarter, perhaps I should say, smart enough, smarter than me, smarter than anyone here, smarter, I dare say, even than Frank, to know this person and what's in his mind? I submit that it's not possible for another human being to tell you he knows this to be true, any more than it's possible for me to tell you, which I don't try and do, because I'm not unreasonable in this way, that I know it isn't true. But don't you see that there's all the difference in the world between my saying I can't know it and Frank saying, well, I can't prove it, because he wants you to believe it's necessary so that you will then become Christian.
It's another ad hoc attack. Turek didn't say he couldn't prove it. He offered amounting evidence. That's the point. You can't prove anything to someone who sets their prerequisite for proof arbitrarily high. There are some people that it doesn't matter how much evidence you show them, they're never going to believe OJ murdered that girl. Some people that no matter how much evidence you show them, they're never going to believe that OJ didn't murder that girl. You know, if you set your prerequisite of proof arbitrarily high, then it's a meaningless phrase. Proof is a nonsensical demand. Because even if I could show you 100% proof, he even said this just a minute ago, what would you do if you saw something like that with your own eyes? Is it more likely that you missaw something? This is a point that Hitchens just made like 5 minutes ago. He said, isn't it more likely? You are more likely to think that you missaw something than to think that you saw something uber supernatural. He just made that point. So the point is, you cannot give him proof that he will accept. Because he's even said that if he saw God raise Christ from the dead himself, he would just think that he missaw what happened. You cannot give enough proof. And he didn't just admit it. Like, it's not an admission. That's part of his argument. Part of his argument is to say that it's unprovable because I will not accept any amount of proof.
Question. And I say that that's a leap that you simply cannot make. And you certainly can't make on the basis of evidence. And I think the religious would be much better to leave evidence alone where they don't excel and to concentrate on faith, where at least they can claim some kind of monopoly. I'm not terribly impressed either by the argument that's advanced so often these days. Remember, all the Christian propositions were complete and absolutely in place. The resurrection, the healing of excuse me, not the healing, the forgiveness of sin, all of these, the virgin birth, the fatherhood of God, the sonhood of Jesus, the Adam and Eve story, all of these things were completely believed and promulgated by the Christian church long before there was any knowledge of the Big Bang or of evolution. So what they're doing is essentially a reverse engineering job. Okay, now we do know these things, most of them established.
The Big Bang, the theory, was proposed by an Anglican priest. They're not reverse engineering. This is the Big Bang at its core was a theistic argument. It was resoundingly rejected when it was first introduced because it was too theistic. Everybody before the guy that came up with the Big Bang theory, everybody thought the universe was eternal. And they rejected the idea because it was too theistic. This is not the Big Bang theory. The Christianity trying to latch on to the Big Bang theory is not a reverse engineering. It came out of the mind of the Christian worldview, specifically and intentionally as a direct result of the belief in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. It is a direct outpouring from that specific line of reasoning. It is not a reverse engineering. It is a direct effect of the Christian cause. Sorry.
Discovered, published in the teeth of religious opposition. Now we know them, that proves we were right all along. God was even cleverer than we thought. This is just plagiarism. It's just borrowing from other disciplines to make it all come right. And if we're going to talk about beginnings, we'd better have a bit of a word about ends. Had we not? About the end, we know a great deal. We know, as Edwin Hubble discovered some time ago, that the universe is expanding at a very, very rapid rate. This is known as the red light shift effect. It was thought by most physicists that that wouldn't go on at the same rate for very long, that the rate at which everything was racing away from itself would diminish. The sort of Newtonian logic would suggest that. In fact, it's been shown very recently by a brilliant physicist named Lawrence Krauss that the Hubble rate is actually increasing. Things are flying apart much, much faster than we thought. Very soon, in fact, it won't be possible probably to see the red light shift or the other traces of the original Big Bang anymore. The end is really coming on us at an increasing rate of speed. So out of our something, to reverse the question that keeps being asked with such suggestiveness, out of our something, a great deal of nothing is coming. So who's the creator and designer of that, may I inquire? And meantime, as any astronomer can tell you, if you look in the sky at night, you can almost, without a telescope, see the Andromeda galaxy heading towards us. It's not very far off in astronomical time. The Andromeda galaxy is headed direct collision course with our own. We know that's going to happen. There's a lot of nothingness headed our way. And that's if we have time. That's if our sun does not swell up, burn out, our oceans boil, everything come to an end. In the meantime, which is a certainty to happen at some point, whether the other things happen before or after or not. So whose design exactly is that? How does it come that just in the tiny suburb of our bit of the cosmos, the little solar system that we inhabit, all of the other planets are either much too hot or much too cold to support anything like a life, as is true of great parts of our own planet? How is that? Some design, some designer. How is it that 99.9% of all the species that have ever been on Earth, ever recorded, have gone extinct, as we very nearly did ourselves as a species in the very early dawning years of our existence in Africa, which has now been mapped. Very nearly went out of business altogether. Who designed that contingency? Whose plan and caprice is this? In other words, if you are to rephrase all these arguments of science and natural law and so forth, to assume that they work better with a God, you're just as badly off as you would be otherwise, because the same laws and the same processes still apply. You just say that they're set in motion by a designer. In that case, he's responsible for the extinctions, he's responsible for the diseases, he's responsible for the chaos, for the dead planets, for the swirling chaos of the other galaxies, for the expanding rate at which nothingness is headed towards us. So this God, if he exists, must be one or some or all of the following. Tinkering and incompetent, very capricious, very wasteful, and very cruel. Now, that is what you get, sir, if you make some deity responsible for the natural order as we observe it, which was the topic we were asked to address this evening. And I think I'd be trespassing on
None of that affects the probability
Frank's
of
time
his
if I went
existence.
any further. So I'll reserve my
That would be fine.
my remaining points for rebuttal. And I'm very grateful for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a lot worse than I thought it was going to be. I'm not going to go back and critique it. Pretty much critiqued all the glaring stuff. I'm gonna. There are other critiques of things he said. But I'm gonna give Frank Turek a chance to respond because I've already interrupted Hitchens enough. Now let's see if Frank Turek makes the points that I'm gonna make, and he'll probably make them better and shorter than me. So in the interest of time, I'm just gonna let Dr. Turek respond, and I'll address them if Turek does not.
Now, Dr. Turek has 10 minutes for rebuttal. Thank you.
I wish I had an English accent. Let me try and go down many of the things Christopher said. He said, I just proved deism, not theism. Notice the creation of life is not a deistic concept, neither is the resurrection of Christ a deistic concept. But I might ask Christopher later if he's a deist now. That would be good. He said he doesn't believe in miracles primarily because of David Hume. But I think Hume's argument is discredited. Hume said that the evidence for the regular is always greater than that for the rare, so you ought to always believe in the regular. The problem with the argument is, with that premise of the argument, is that the evidence for the regular isn't always greater than that for the rare. In fact, if Hume were here today, he would believe in the Big Bang. And that's a singular event. It hasn't happened over and over and over again. It's not the Big Bang, 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 bang theory. It happened only once. He would also believe in the spontaneous generation of life. If it happened at all, it happened only once. It's not happening over and over again. He would also believe in macroevolution. If that happened, it happened only once. In fact, the entire history of the Earth has only happened once. So to say that the evidence for the regular is always greater than that for the rare is not so. In fact, if Hume were consistent, he wouldn't believe in his own birth, because it only happened once physically. There's two realms of science. There's empirical science, where you can do something over and over again, and there's forensic science, where you've got evidence, and it's a situation where you can just look at the evidence and try and figure out what happened in the past based upon the resulting evidence. It's like a criminal investigation. Singularities happen all the time, and it's kind of odd for Hume to say that you ought not believe in a rare event if it really happened. Suppose it did happen, like the Big Bang. If it did happen, Hume says you ought not believe in it. There's some problem with that argument. Also, for miracles to get our attention, they by definition have to be rare. They can't be regular events. If they were regular events, we'd think they were part of the natural phenomenon. So they have to be rare to get our attention. So Hume's argument is about believability. It's not about actuality. Miracles can actually occur, and Hume is saying if they actually occur, you ought not believe in them. That's a bad argument. Also, he said you can't say there was no prime mover. That's what Christopher said, and that's what I'm saying. You can't say there was no prime mover. In fact, I think there was a prime mover. In fact, later on he said, who made God? That's the big problem for theists. It's not a problem at all. Why? Because since something exists, we obviously exist, we're here, then something must have always existed, because you can't create yourself. There has to be an eternal, uncaused first cause. Now, we have two possibilities. Either the universe is eternal and doesn't need a cause, and atheists have believed that for many years. They believed in the steady state theory and thought the universe was eternal. They had no problem believing in an eternal universe. The second...
That was what I was talking about before the Big Bang came to such prominence. The only reason the Big Bang came to such prominence is because we found more and more and more and more and more and more and more evidence, to the point where it's like now it's the standard model. But at the time that it was released, the time that paper came out where it was first theorized, it was resoundingly rejected because of this theory right here that he's talking about.
Possibility is that there's something outside the universe that is eternal. Now, I've given evidence, I know very quickly, that the universe has not always been here. It's not eternal. The surge evidence. Second law, universe expanding, radiation afterglow, great galaxy seeds, Einstein. The universe is not eternal, so it must be something outside the universe that is. And that cause, it seems to me, must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Why? Because you can't, if all space, all matter, and all time were created, the cause must be outside of space, matter, and time. This cause must also be extremely intelligent. Why? Because he created...
That's another point that Turek is inconsistently good at explaining. I've heard him explain it very well, but most of the time when he tries to explain it, he does it very poorly. The example he gives that does very well is, let's see, I don't remember the exact item he used to give an example, but before the invention of, I'm going to give the same example, but I'm going to use a different topic because I don't remember exactly what his example is, but essentially it was this. Before the invention of the automobile, were there any automobiles to make automobiles? Or man, this is how come Frank Turek does this on stage, and I do it on this obscure corner of Twitch. Jeez. It was always pretentious for me to try to do it better than him. If I could remember Alright, so let's say you've got to say that something, like to say that who created God is essentially to say, like, what came before God. And it's nonsensical because there is no before the universe. Before the universe is a nonsensical statement because time began at the beginning of the universe. There is no before time began because there is no time. Alright? So you cannot be outside of time and have something come before you because there isn't time. There isn't a sequence or a series of events. There is just being. Just existence. So when God volitionally creates time, alright, from that moment forward, everything after that moment has a before, and the before is that moment. But there is no before that moment. It's an absurd idea. It's a nonsensical, absurd idea to say what came before the beginning of time. There is no before. So to say who created God is to say what came before God. And it's nonsensical. God is outside time. So, if he is outside time, then outside time, there is no cause, there is no effect, there is no before, there is no after, there just is. That means God just is. There isn't even an always, or even an eternity in the way that we think about it. It just is ising. Is ising. Is always ising. Like, always was ising. But there is no was, there is no is, and there is no will be. It's just is. It's just ising. Like, there's no way to put it beyond that. And that's something I definitely don't make the point better than he does. He definitely made it better than me, but a lot of times he skips over that he just kind of throws this out there in a way that doesn't explain that very well, and so it's easy for other people to pass over it. But anyway, it's just again, let's keep rolling here.
With extreme precision. He must also be personal. How can he be personal? Because you can't go from a state of non-existence to a state of existence without making a choice. An impersonal force has no ability to make choices. There couldn't have been like the Star Wars, use the Force, Luke, choice out there. The Force has no ability to make choices. Only a person can make choices. And once there was nothing physical, spatial, or temporal, and then suddenly an entire space-time continuum was created out of what rocks dream about, out of nothing. So someone made a choice.
Why must they have made a choice? Again, this is something he explains very well, but he's about to pass over. They had to have made a choice because there can't be an infinite regress into the past. If the thing didn't make a choice, the alternative is that it always was. It was necessary for it to have happened the way it happened, and it would have happened the way gravity happens. Immediately, it would have happened automatically. Therefore, this universe would have been created not just like basically an infinite time ago, because there wouldn't have been anybody to make a choice. It just would have happened. It just would have happened, and it would have been an infinite amount of time ago. But if there is a being, then you can have an eternity of emptiness and non-movement in all directions, and then someone make a choice at an arbitrary point inside that eternity. So that's the reason why that's important. But again, I didn't explain that very well. I probably just muddled it.
Christopher also said we look for patterns. Yes, we do look for patterns, and the pattern I'm looking for is specified complexity that was in the first life and is in all life since then. When you see bennies go home on the beach, you don't assume the crabs did that. You don't assume it was made by natural law. You assume there was a mind behind it. He said religion came from or started with baby sacrifice. I know what religion's like. Well, many religions are false. I don't disagree. But to conflate all religions and put them all together and say, therefore, all religious viewpoints are false is not so. Christopher and I agree on 99% of religions out there that are false. I agree with them. I just think there's one that is true. I'm not saying that every religion, everything they teach is false. I'm saying there are certain things they teach that are false. So we don't disagree there. He said I ought to stop giving evidence and just rely on faith. That would make a pretty stupid debate, wouldn't it? I just have faith it's true, and I'd sit down. Christianity does not say rely on faith. Christianity says always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Be ready to demolish arguments that are counter to God. It says test all things. Christians don't get brownie points for being stupid, despite the fact that the church has not lived up to this. We're supposed to give evidence. Secondly, there's a difference between belief that and belief in. Belief, I have to believe that the elevator has a floor in it before I get in it, before I put my trust in it to hold me up. That's belief in, that I trust it's going to hold me up. But I have to have evidence that there's a floor there before I'm going to put my foot in there. In the same way, I have to have evidence that God exists before I'm going to put my trust in him, and that's what I'm trying to do here. I don't know what the big spiel was about Mother Teresa. I don't know what that has to do with Christopher's worldview or how he's given any arguments for atheism. He hasn't given any arguments for his worldview yet. He's just complaining about what some religious people have done. Complaints about what some religious people have done does not do anything to whether or not Christianity is true. In fact, Christianity predicts we'll be hypocrites. That's why we need a savior. I am a hypocrite. But that doesn't mean that Christianity's false. Christianity's based on a person, Jesus, who was perfect. I'm not. That's why he had to come. Christopher also said, how am I doing on time, sir?
4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. I was going into a Jersey overspeed there. Christopher said, I know how religion starts. Maybe he does, but I think many times he confuses a personal anecdote with data. You don't just take a personal anecdote and say, this is how all religions start. How do you know that? He said, how could I know if God exists? It's called revelation, and everybody in here has revelation. There's two types of revelation. There's natural revelation and special revelation. Everybody in here and everybody out there knows there's a creator God from creation, because we know God by his effects, and also from conscience. Those two things show that there is a creator and a moral creator. The third revelation
Gotta knock him for his wording there. He's speaking Christianese. He's not speaking plain language. He used the word like revelation. You gotta use better words to communicate your idea, because that's not going to come across the way he intends. He intends that to mean, when he says natural revelation from nature, he's referring to seeing evidence in the natural world. But that's not what he said. And know your audience. If your audience is people out there that aren't members of Christian land, you need to be speaking their language, not yours. And he's speaking Christianese.
Is through Christ and the Bible, in my view. Now, as I said, I haven't had enough time to go through all the data. I've got several chapters, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, trying to show why I think the New Testament documents are true. But that would be revelation. I don't see why, if I write Christopher a letter and I say, Christopher, this is what I'm thinking, like we did email trying to arrange this debate, he could figure out what my thoughts were. I can't see why God couldn't do the same thing. If he wants to write a book or a book of letters or whatever to try and tell us what he's about, he can do that. Not a problem. He said something about proof. I'm dealing with a probability argument here. Am I absolutely sure Christianity is true? No. I'm not absolutely sure. There's very few things you can be absolutely sure about. I'm trying to give a probability argument based on the evidence that there is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who ultimately revealed himself in Jesus Christ about 2,000 years ago. Now, could I be wrong about that? Yes, I could. And during the Q&A, throw some stuff at us. That's fine. But Christopher seems to say that I just want you to convert to Christianity. Well, I'd love for you to do that, as if he's not trying to get you to convert to atheism. What do you think he's doing here at this debate? He wants to get you to agree with him. And for many good reasons in many cases. That maybe you ought to give up false religious beliefs. You ought to. I agree with Christopher on that. If they're false, give them up. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. A lot of times there may be things that you think are false that really aren't. Christopher finally talked about the issue of some design. This universe is heading toward oblivion. Look, the very fact that something may be degrading doesn't mean it wasn't designed in the first place. Your car is currently degrading right now, but that doesn't mean it wasn't designed. There's something in the universe known as the second law of thermodynamics, and it basically means we're all going to go to heat death. That's true. Now, you can't say that the designer was capricious because you don't know the intentions of the designer. The only way you can say that something wasn't designed optimally is if you know what the intentions of the designer were. How does he know what the intentions of the designer are? Maybe he wants the universe to go to oblivion so he can then create a new heavens and a new earth, which is exactly what Revelation 22 says. If you notice...
This would have been a perfect time to bring up the laws of nature were suspended at 32 minutes. Hitchens basically refers to miracles as suspension of the laws of nature. I'm not going to try to explain that. I'm going to keep going and see if he brings that up, but I want you to keep that in mind.
Christopher has not given any real positive evidence for his worldview. He has not dealt with the fact that the universe exploded into being out of nothing, the extreme fine-tuning that arose from chaos, how the first life filled with libraries full of a genetic code arose from non-life, how morality arose from materials, and how materials have any moral authority over us. In fact, he just called the designer cruel. How does he know cruel if we're just molecules in motion? Where does cruel come from? There's no cruel. There's no truth. There's no nothing. We're just chemical reactions up here. So if I'm doing something wrong, if you don't agree with me, forgive me, but I have the wrong chemicals.
Thank you.
All right. Other side. That was a little childish. He shouldn't have done that very last sentence. Because it didn't have the landing impact that he wanted it to have. It's nonsensical to call God cruel. Like, that he already made that point. That's right. All we are is a bunch of chemical reactions walking around in bags of other chemical reactions. Like, cares if it's cruel? Who gives, like, seriously, who cares? Why does it matter? We're all just gonna die in the heat death of the universe. Like it's just, it's really stupid to care if it's cruel. I mean, I understand if it affects your own suffering. Sure. But if there's no God, there's no one to be mad at for it. And if there is a God, none of that's true. It's a suspension of the laws of nature. Like, the universe is winding down. We're all going to die in a heat death. If God exists, then we're not all going to die in a heat death. Because the same God that wound up the universe can sustain it. That's like saying that a basketball player can throw up a basketball on his finger and just sit there and have it spin, and that it's inevitable that since that ball is going to slow down and fall off that finger, that there must be no finger holding it up. That's his argument. That's essentially what his argument is. He's saying that it's obvious that since the ball is spinning and it's going to slow down and it's eventually going to fall off the finger, that there must be no finger holding it up. And there must have been no hand that started it spinning in the first place. That was his argument. It's absurd. And I know that's not what he believes, but that's how he presented it, and it's absurd. The same hand that set it spinning initially and is holding it up can hit it again and keep it going. He can keep applying energy. The laws of thermodynamics doesn't say that everything breaks down all the time and nothing can ever be built into something of order. The laws of thermodynamics says that if you don't collect energy and apply it to a thing and build it up, that it's going to run down. There has to be something built up in order for it to run down. The laws of thermodynamics says that your car is going to eventually degrade and break down, and the parts are going to rust, and the holes are going to get bored out, and there's going to be more and more disorder in the system over time. But that doesn't change the fact that we put direct energy into that system and put it into order. We put direct energy into that system and we put it into order. And so now that order will eventually run down, especially if it's left to its own devices. But we can put more energy into it and restore it and bring it back to order and replace parts that were worn down. We can do that. We can maintain the car and keep it going. If God exists, he can do the same thing. And so the eventual heat death of the universe is not an argument even for God's cruelty, much less his non-existence. It's an absurd argument. It's not a point. So I don't know where he was going with that. It just seems silly. So there's nothing more to say about it.
Well, first of all, there's obviously no equivalence at all between what I want to persuade you of and what Frank wants to persuade you of. I don't say if you believe with me in Revelation, you can be saved and your sins taken away from you. Nor do I say, as Christians tend to.
No, he says that you have no sins to be forgiven of. That's the direct implication. He doesn't say it, but that is a direct implication. And in fact, there are several atheists who have openly come out and said that that's why they are atheists. It's not because the evidence is bad. The evidence may be bad, that's not the point, but there are people out there who are atheists simply because they don't want to believe, because they don't want a moral law they have to follow. So, yes, he is doing that. He's saying he's not, and maybe that's not his intention, but that is a direct implication. You have no sins to be forgiven of, because there are no sins. There's no God, there's no one that's going to punish you for what you've done. Eternity is oblivion. Do whatever you want right now. There are actual people. One of those people was David Wood, who was also a Christian apologist. Look up. He's not on YouTube anymore. Look up David Wood. Try to find his stuff. It's crazy. He's a diagnosed sociopath. Tried to kill his own father before he became a Christian. So that's an interesting set of videos.
If you're quite free to disagree with me as long as you're willing to go to hell. It's just not the same. I don't menace people in that way, nor do I give them false promises. Neither the blackmail nor the bribery exists in my argument.
Bribery. You can live however you want with no repercussions. There's no God that's going to send you to hell for doing what you want. That's the bribery. The repercussions. If you don't believe the way I do, then you are a part of a religion that is causing bad things to happen, because religion is the source of all evil in the world. That is a point he makes. He hasn't made it yet in this video. I have heard Christopher Hitchens make that point, that religion is the source of all evil. He is doing exactly what he says he's not doing. He's offering a reward if you believe the way he believes, and he's offering fear of some kind of punishment if you believe the way Turek believes. It's exactly what he's doing, and he's claiming he's not doing it. It's not a lie. It's just, it's not a very well thought through worldview, and it's coming out all over the place, which is why I think he's bad at the debate thing here. I think it's because he's a liar or dishonest or disingenuous. I think he thought that he could just show up and have an argument and be persuasive. And maybe he is persuasive. To someone who already agrees with him. Just like Frank Turek is being probably super persuasive to people who already agree with him. But it's not working on me. And I disagree with him. So
ask you to think for yourselves and consider the evidence. And if you do that, I should have done this in my first set of remarks. Let's just take these graffiti on the beach. This is one of the oldest arguments in the business. It originates from a long discredited book by a Cambridge clergyman called Paley, who wrote a book called Natural Theology. He said if you are an Aborigine walking along a beach and you come across a gold watch ticking, you know not anything about what it's for. You have no idea what it's for or why it's there. But you know it's not a vegetable. You know it's not a rock. You know it hasn't occurred in nature. It must be there for another reason. Someone must have made this. Perfectly decent point to make. But the organisms such as ourselves are not mechanisms. They're not wound up. They're not jammed together in this way. And if any of you will cast your eyes over any work about the Darwinian alternative explanation for this, the best is actually called The Blind Watchmaker. It's by Richard Dawkins. You'll see that it's perfectly intelligible and well understood and has been computer modeled now to the satisfaction of 99% of all readers in the matter, that we know what the building blocks of existence.
I want to see the statistics on that. I think that's horseshit. But aside from that claim about 99% of all readers, this is a good point. This is a good counter argument. That's what I'm saying, man. He's all over the place. So, like, he's got a couple of things that are really good, and the rest of it just seems like he just hasn't thought it out very well. Part of that's he's on a live debate stage. He's doing better than I would, so I don't want to criticize him too badly, but just point it out that it's not as good of a point, that some of these things aren't as good of a point as he thinks they are. However, this one is so far, so let's
how
keep going.
very, very long and haphazard, with so much extinction, 99% of all species, so much adaptation, so much hit and miss, that it was all put together. There's no mystery about it. The non-theistic, the non-deistic view does describe this reality and has more or less mastered the description of it. If you... No, I brought the wrong page of what I wanted to say. If you take the opposite view, here's what you have to think. Francis Collins, who did the Human Genome Project, reckons that Homo sapiens, he's a great believing Christian, by the way, Dr. Collins, great man. Homo sapiens has been on the Earth for at least 100,000 years, our species. Not very long. Some think it may be as many as 250,000 years. Richard Dawkins thinks it could easily be 200,000 years. I don't particularly mind. I'll take the low end. let's take the Christian Dr. Collins's view that we, our own primate species, has been around on Earth for 100,000 years. Now, if you don't take the view I just offered you, the anti-paleo view, here's what you have to imagine. That for 98,000 of those years, humans were born, most of them actually not succeeding in being born, because a good percentage, maybe more than half, would have died in the experience of being born, would have died in childbirth, many of them taking their mothers with them. Life expectancy for the first 50 or 60 or 70,000 years or so, actually the first 80,000, of not much more than 25 to 30 years. Mysterious, terrible plagues and diseases and pains, inexplicable, unanalyzable, incurable. Terrifying events like tidal waves, volcanic eruptions, purely scary, no idea where this is coming from. Fear and trembling. As if that's not bad enough, the prefrontal lobe is rather small of this species. The adrenaline gland is rather bigger than it needs to be. There's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of warfare over territory, over food, over women, even more casualties, even more suffering, torture, enslavement, all of this. And for the first 98,000 years, heaven, the designer, watches this with perfect indifference as a spectator.
This is a claim of a fact of history that we have no evidence for whatsoever. He has no idea that history was like this. The Bible gives a history of mankind, and it doesn't say this. So the assumption he is making to say that God is cruel is that God allowed this to happen. But in order to say that God is cruel, you have to accept that God exists. Alright? And if God exists, then this didn't happen. Because, okay, if the God of the Bible exists, if the God of the Bible exists, then this didn't happen. Because we have a detail of what early manhood was like in the Bible. This didn't happen. It wasn't like this. This is an assumption he's making. He has no forensic evidence. He has no scientific evidence. These are all assumptions. That's all they are. They are assumptions that this is what early mankind was like. The warfare, the fear, all these things happening. He has no idea if it's true. None. It very well could be completely untrue. Early humans could have been leading very simple, simplistic lives that had little to no danger and were filled with contentment and simple happiness and working for their... He has no idea if what he's saying is true. And if the God of the Bible actually existed, then we know it wasn't true. So he can't use this as a critique of the God of the Bible. Now, could there be his idea of the deistic God? Yeah, we can level this claim at that deistic God, but not at the Christian God, because if the Christian God is true, which he has to be in order for this to be a criticism of him, then we know that this is not historically how that played out. If the God of the Bible doesn't exist, then he's not making the claim that he thinks he's making. He's arguing against a person that Turek already doesn't believe in. So, again, yeah.
And then around 2,000 to 3,000 years ago thinks this won't do. We better intervene. These people need a revelation. In fact, they need a savior. So we'll send them one, but we'll send him or her or whoever to the most remote and illiterate and superstitious part of the Middle East. And then we'll see if the news can spread from there, and if anyone will believe it if it's written down. Well, they got the last bit right. People are willing to believe that.
And from the most illiterate, most obscure part of the Middle East, it went worldwide and was the most influential religion on the planet. So to say that God had no intervention in that is absurd. If you're accepting the premise for the sake of argument, to say that God didn't influence the rest of that is absolutely absurd. So, yeah. So again, like, these arguments make sense if there is no God, but if there is a God, then they are absurd. All over the place. He was just making a good point not long ago. Come on, dude.
But I ask you what it is to believe such a thing. Now, 100 years ago, I couldn't have made this point because we wouldn't have had the information on which to base this supposition. We wouldn't have known that something like that is what you'd have to believe. But remember, long before any of this evidence was available, the Christian worldview was already well in place and completely and perfectly believed. So if you believe that any of these beliefs are derived from or originate in a study of evidence, so much the worse for you, because you've just been assured by Dr. Turek that that's not the case. It comes from a faith in revelation. Don't confuse it with evidence. Now,
Bam! I told you that statement about revelation was a mistake. I told you. See, and this is exactly why. It's because he jumped straight to it requires faith in evolution. And he stated, because he thinks that that's what Frank thinks, is that it's a God-breathed revelation directly to your mind. You need to have revelation sprinkled on you like fairy dust from Tinkerbell. That's what he thinks that Frank Turek was saying. Frank Turek screwed up because he called it revelation. He was speaking Christianese. He needed to call it evidence from the world around you. But he didn't. So he used Christianese, and now Frank Hitchens is responding to that in the way that it sounds to him as someone who doesn't speak Christianese. And it wasn't as powerful as an argument as it could have been. I'm not saying it would have convinced him, but it definitely didn't land. It was a blow that didn't land as hard as it could have, because Frank threw it in the wrong direction.
one of the things that atheism is much better at describing in the real world than theism is this. Why is there so much warfare between the faithful? Frank has just told us that 99% of all religions he thinks are bogus or phony, which must...
He's about to make a point about warfare among religions being the cause of all warfare. One atheist regime is responsible for more death and more from warfare and privation and all that, intentional by its leader, than all religious wars from all religions combined for all of written history. Stalin was a blatantly atheist. He was a blatant atheist. He hated God. He hated the idea of God. He thought that religion was the opium of the masses, just like because he followed his god, Karl Marx. He believed that religion was a poison, and that he was an atheist. And his atheist regime killed between 20 million and 60 million people in like 50 years. Like less than 50 years. Stalin killed more people in less than a century than all religious wars from all religions across all of known history combined. In less than 100 years, one atheist. Don't tell me that religion is the source of all evil, because that is horseshit. Human beings are the source of all evil. Well, not religion. Human beings who fail to live up to religion are the source of that evil. Free, conscious choice to defy morality is the source of evil. It's nonsensical to say that religion is the cause and that atheism is exempt from all this. The fact that atheists are just as bad, and atheism as a concept has only even been popular for 500 years of thousands of years of written human history. No, like you don't, and it's still managed to catch up. People just suck, which is the whole point in the Christian religion. So it's nonsense to say that this is an argument against God. Jeez, I should have known he was gonna go here. So many do. It's just so. It's a stupid argument.
I mean, also, by the way, that they're evil, which is quite a big admission for him to make, because if someone goes around preaching a bogus and false religion, they're not just giving bad information, they're spreading wicked delusions and trying to get people to believe in awful things.
Only if they believe it's a delusion. Otherwise, they're trying to spread the truth, just like you. Just like Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens is trying to say what he thinks is true. Those people spreading those deluded religions, only the initial person who told the lie is the evil one. The rest of them are just deluded people trying to do what's right.
So those who say that you can't have morality without religion have suddenly had to make a rather large concession, have they not? That 99% of it is just dead wrong. Now, our view of this is that it's not surprising. It's just what you would expect if religion was man-made, and if it fluctuated depending on the level of culture and climate and other things around the world. Religions would keep on being made by men, and there have been literally hundreds of thousands of gods whose names we know, many of whom have now been forgotten or are no longer worshipped. Well, there are three conceivable explanations for this, or accounts of it, shall we say. One is that all of these religions are true. One is all of them are false. And one is that only one of them is correct. Well, clearly, the first option isn't available to us. They can't all be true. According to Frank, one of them is. It's Christianity. Do you know how many versions of Christianity there are? Mutually incompatible, excommunicating each other, describing each other as Antichrist. Would you like me to list them? I bet you if I asked him, he wouldn't say Mormons were Christians. And a Mormon wouldn't think that he can be saved either, because he doesn't believe in Joseph Smith's revelation. And the Pope of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, says that the Roman Catholic Church is the only way to salvation. It's the only true church. The others aren't really Christian at all. So all you're doing is multiplying that difference again, whereas the obvious, the clear, the lucid answer is staring you in the face. It's available to all. There's no mystery to it. This stuff is man-made. No shame in that.
The fact that they all disagree is not proof that it's man-made. It's still proof that at least one of them is right. It's not proof that at least one of them is right. It is absolutely not. You still have to prove that all of them are wrong. If one of them is right, that one is still right. So the fact that they all claim to be right, it doesn't matter how many divisions there are in Christianity. As long as all of them still claim to be right, you have to disprove all of them. Otherwise, this argument is nonsense. The fact that there are many different splits in beliefs is not proof that all of them are wrong. It's just recognition that there are many splits in the belief. So.
Say, no shame. I mean, after all, so in my submission are our morals and ethics man-made. It's common to us, as a matter of human solidarity, to know, without being told by revelation from Mount Sinai, a location that's never been discovered, by the way, that a group of primates that thought that murder...
That's not true. Mount Sinai, there's nothing special about Mount Sinai. It's just a frickin' hill in the desert. To say that it's never been discovered, we've probably discovered it 8,000 times, but there's nothing about it that's significant. There were no monuments raised there. There's no significant mark left on the ground. Moses went to the top of the mountain, and, so the story goes, God handed him some stone tablets. 5,000 years ago. He walked down to the bottom of the mountain, threw the tablets on the ground, and smashed them to tiny pieces. The fact that we haven't found a nondescript mountain in the middle of the desert, somewhere between Egypt and Israel, with thousands of tiny broken rock fragments, 5,000 years old, that are probably so eroded that none of the letters are left on them, it's not exactly surprising. Nothing happened there. I mean, things happened, but nothing happened that would have left a permanent mark on the ground that would have allowed us to mark that place. Mount Sinai, it's like a mount was just a hill. It's a common term for a hill. When they say mount, it's not what we think of when we think of like the Rockies or the Alps. A mount is just a raised piece of ground. It doesn't have to be very high. So in the Sermon on the Mount, the Mount with the Sermon on the Mount, it's like 100 feet high or something at its apex. Like, it's not a tall place. All right, it's just a nondescript hill in the middle of the frickin' desert. All right, so this is not a refutation either. It's
If
silly.
theft and perjury were okay, would not evolve very far, or live or survive very long. It just wouldn't happen. We have a duty to each other, and we better understand it or die. There is no society that hasn't made or drawn this conclusion. Societies that fail to, that practice things like cannibalism and incest, literally do die out. They don't survive. They don't adapt. They don't evolve. They don't make it. Again, no mystery, but to say that without God we wouldn't know, and that without God any evil we did would be thinkable, is the precise reverse of the case. I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters. Is it not rather the case that with God everything is permissible? That once a primate believes he has God on his side, that primate is capable of anything. The suicide bombing community, more or less 100% religious.
That's true. But more or less 0% Christian. So yeah. Yeah. You can do anything if you claim God is on your side. Just like you can do anything if you claim God doesn't exist. But if you claim that God is on his own side, and you need to get on God's side, and you need to change your behavior to fit with God's, then no, you can't do those things. The problem is when you have people say, God is on my side, I am God's representative. So I would need that person to prove that God was on his side. And otherwise, you're still not proving that at least one of them is correct. Like, you're not proving that none of them can be correct. You're still only proving that most of them is wrong. And that's already the point, that only one is correct. So, again, proving that most of them are wrong does nothing for your point. You have to prove that all of them are wrong, or at least one of them is still correct. I mean, if you're going to follow this line of argument, which he chose to follow this line of argument. It was a bad idea to go down this road. It's not a convincing argument. It's rather silly. Again, it's going to solidify in the minds of people who already believe him, but it's not convincing to someone who doesn't. So,
Genital mutilation community, practically 100% religious. The injunctions and warrants in the...
Again, genital mutilation community, almost entirely Islamic. So, he's criticized one religion twice, and that wasn't Christianity.
The Bible, in the text itself, for slavery, for genocide, inescapably right there. And
No. Slavery, no. Genocide, still, that's another topic, but it's still not what he's claiming it is. But, again, let's assume that it is. Genocide isn't wrong. If we're just molecular machines, they're just dancing to their DNA. If God is correct, then those actions were justified. Like, if God exists, those actions were justified. If God doesn't exist, then they don't matter. But if God exists, those actions were justified. Because God is God. Like, the whole point in human beings not killing is that human beings aren't allowed to play God. But God can play God. That's like saying that the king, or that the president is not allowed to sign executive orders because the rest of the country isn't allowed to sign executive orders. or like the court isn't allowed to sentence anyone to death because the rest of the country can't sentence, like regular everyday citizens can't sentence people to death. Like again a silly argument. God is God. God is all-knowing. If he exists, assuming he exists, which he is, you have to assume God exists to call him morally bad, which Hitchens is doing. So if we're going to assume that God exists, then you have to accept the description of God as is. And if the description of God as is correct, and God is, then God was justified in those actions. He's going to be the same type of person that's going to turn around and say, well, why didn't God, if God exists, why didn't God stop the Jews? The Hitler from killing the Jews? Or why didn't God stop Stalin from murdering up to 60 million of his own people? Why didn't God do this? Why didn't God do that? And then God kills the Canaanites, who are taking their children, their live children, and putting them on a molten hot idol and watching them sizzle to death, while the drummers beat drums to hide the screams. Turek brings that up a lot. I didn't actually learn that from Turek, but it's true. That was what the worship of the god Molech was. But Turek brings that up. I could probably bring that up here. That those people were just brutally murdering their own children in ways that were excruciating and caused immense amounts of unnecessary suffering. And he's gonna sit here and say God should have just let that keep happening? And then turn around and say that God should have stopped the Nazis or should have stopped Stalin? Like, one or the other, dude. Either God steps into the world and stops evil, or he doesn't. You know, God steps in when it serves his purposes. And you may not like that, but, you know, who gives a crap what you like? If God exists, you're an ant, and he owns you. And if he treats you with any kind of kindness or niceness or love or mercy at all, he doesn't have to. And by definition, it's like you don't have to worship him if you think he's cruel, but you're extra dumb if you think he's cruel and you don't worship him. So, I don't think any of that's true about God, but like it's a dumb line of argument.
Acted upon, and in the name of God, by primates who thought they had God on their side. It is when people think they are God's appointed or anointed that any kind of wickedness is possible. Let me ask you, rephrase it and ask you the question in reverse. Can you, sir, or can anyone here, name a moral or ethical action or statement that could be made by a believer, a moral or ethical statement or action, made or taken, uttered, that couldn't be made or uttered or taken by me as a non-believer? You have to think quickly. No, you don't. You've got all night. I'll give you my email. There's a prize for anyone who can name me the moral action I can't commit that a believer can. Now, I've never had an answer yet. I don't expect to. But if I asked you, think of a wicked action you've heard of that could only have been committed by someone who believed they had God on their side, you've already thought of it. You know, you don't have to...
No, there's not a single wicked action I can think of that only a religious person can do. Not one. All of them atheists have justified and done. All of them. In a much shorter history. Not saying they've done it more often, or they've done worse things. People are evil, whether they're religious or atheists. Doesn't matter. That's the point.
You don't have to hesitate. You just have to think of the last suicide bomber, the last genital mutilation, the last jihad, the last...
Yeah, about that. You should have seen the stuff that Japan did. Japan was another atheist regime. Actually, I don't know if they were atheists. Like, Japan's never been, like, strictly atheist, but, like, the Japanese emperor was a pretty atheist regime. The kinds of human experiments that he did, the kinds of human experiments that the Nazi did, and everybody's going to bring up, oh, well, Hitler was raised in the church. That does not make you a Christian. Hitchens himself grew up in the church. He's not a Christian. So it's absurd to say that just because Hitler went to church as a child, or even said a few positive things about God in some very emotionally charged speeches to people who hadn't universally rejected all religion, at a time and place where atheism was not a popular viewpoint, it doesn't make him a Christian. It doesn't make him even claiming to be a Christian. Hitler, so anyway, it's a silly argument. Christians, Muslims, atheists, if more of these types of atrocities are committed by religious people, like on average, like currently, it's because there are more religious people by like thousands of orders of magnitude in the world than there are atheists. So yeah, like but if you're gonna go per capita, atheists take the cake, man. They're just as deadly and just as cruel in all areas as Christians or Muslims or Hindus or whatever. People are people, no matter their religious preference.
Crusade, the last alliance between the Vatican and fascism, anything you like, and it's done. So it's an insult to be told that without superstition and without the supernatural, we wouldn't know how to treat one another well, we wouldn't know the difference between right and wrong, we couldn't perform a right action or utter ethical remarks. It's a degrading...
No one makes that claim anywhere ever. Frank doesn't make it, no one makes it. It's a red herring and it's a straw man.
Insult. It makes us serfs. It makes us slaves. It makes us people dependent upon a celestial dictatorship that cannot be altered, that watches us while we sleep, whose verdicts cannot be challenged, who can convict us of thought crime. In my judgment, the emancipation of humanity, which has taken a very great deal of time.
Thought crime? You mean like what happened in Stalinist Russia? Oh, yeah, thought crime. I really honestly thought I was going to be harder on Frank. It actually makes me a little bit sad.
Just as the expansion of our life expectancy had to be worked on very hard. When it was left just to God to decide these things, we didn't live very long, couldn't cure any diseases, and didn't know that our planet wasn't the center of the universe. But once this emancipation has begun...
Again, it was a Christian that made that observation. Again, just ignore that. No, religion is what made us think that we were no, observation is what made us think we were the center of the universe. Because if you observe, it looks like everything else is moving and we're standing still. That's what observation tells us. When we have no instruments and no other ways of calculating, observation told us. It was religion that taught us that we weren't the center of the universe. Again, just spitting out things that just flat out aren't true. Just, dude, come on. I want to get to the end of this. Try not to make it so easy for me to refute everything you say. I mean, granted, if we were up on that stage, Hitchens would probably obliterate me, so don't... He's way better at this than I am, but as someone who can sit here with hindsight, and pick him apart, just... He's using canned responses. Don't use canned responses. Think, give real evidence, and he's not doing it. Jeez.
I think it's unstoppable, and the emancipation of humanity begins when you throw off the idea that you live in a celestial North Korea and that only a dictator can give you permission to think or behave well or act morally. Thank you.
Thank you. We we will now turn to the question and answer session for the speakers between themselves. Each speaker, starting with Dr. Turek, will have the opportunity of asking two brief questions of their opponent, who will then give brief replies. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I suppose if I can't be erect, I can at least be upright. I wasn't ready, in other words.
Christopher,
Sir.
I gave evidence the universe had a beginning, and it did so with great precision. I'd like to ask you a question that I think Leibniz brought up many years ago. If there is no God, why does anything exist?
We both have this Navy background.
Yes, sir.
In Portsmouth, where I'm from, there's an old story about a young man taking his captain's examination before a board of admirals. And they say to him, right, your ship is on a lee shore. It's being driven by whatever wind towards the rocks. What are you going to do to get out of this terrible position? He says, I would pile on an extra sail and pull the stern hard to starboard and hope by this means to escape to save the ship. And they said, well, going very well, but there's the wind is still blowing, the gale is coming at you still, and the rocks are getting nearer. Now what are you going to do? So I put on more sail and keep the helm hard down to starboard and maintain this position. But yes, but the wind is still blowing you, and the gale force has increased, and the rocks are getting near. Now what are you going to do? And he said, well, I'd cram on extra sail and keep the helm hard down to starboard. One of the admirals with rather red-faced exasperation at this point says, where are you getting all this extra sail from? And the young captain says, well, the same place you're getting all that extra wind from. Now, either a priori you believe in a creation story, or you do not. I am, I'll just have to say it. I'm one of those people who's meant by Pascal when he says he's writing his pensée to those who are so made that they cannot believe. You have to include me in that. I don't believe in a creator. I don't believe I'm supervised. I don't believe that a being set the universe in motion, and I don't know.
Then how is it set in motion?
And I don't know any physicist who does, and I'm not a physicist
I quoted
myself.
a lot of
but
them
I'm saying,
already.
if you and I had been having this argument in the 18th century, you'd be saying that I should recognize Jesus as my personal savior, and you wouldn't have heard of the Big Bang.
I would have heard of...
And you don't convince me...
What does that have to do with the question?
I'll just have to say this. You don't convince me that there's any connection between your faith and any scientific observation.
There's a difference between
but
proof
I'm not,
and persuasion.
I'm not here to debate physics, and I'm not competent to do so.
Okay, so you don't have an answer for that, how the universe came into existence out of nothing.
No more than you do, no.
Let's move to the second question.
If all space, all matter, and all time had a beginning, the cause must be outside of space,
You don't know how
matter,
it
and
happened,
time.
and neither do I. Okay?
Well, now this is important, Dr. Taylor, because in his book, Christopher Hitchens on page 70 says that he knows that this happened without God. That's what you said. It works without God. So how does it work without God?
No, I'm sorry, I think you must be quoting my quotation from Laplace.
No,
am I
I'm
not correct?
No. Page 70.
Laplace says it works without that assumption, yes.
Here's what you say. You say, however, and critically, we can now do this while dropping, or even if you insist, retaining the idea of God, but in either case, the theory works without that assumption. So how does it work without that assumption?
I'm repeating, first, as you'll notice, I say you can retain the idea if you like. It has no explanatory value. But it works without the assumption as well as it works with it.
How does it work without?
And I'm referring back to what the great astronomer and physicist Laplace said when asked by the emperor, when he'd shown him his working model of the universe, and the emperor said, well, there doesn't seem to be a God in this.
Laplace was
system of yours.
centuries ago, Christopher. We've advanced in physics since then. We know other things.
Said, Your Majesty, it works without that assumption. I'm simply re-quoting him And I'm saying, and you can retain the idea if you like. You're not going to convince me, and I don't think you've convinced anyone in the audience, that you know very much more about the origins of the universe than they did.
It's an implication.
And that would be true
Turek?
even if you knew more about
It's
it
his
than
question
I do,
now.
which you may well.
Mr. Hitchens,
Yes.
would you like to ask a question of Dr. Turek?
Yes, I'd like to ask him what kind of Christian he is, and who are and who are not Christians, in his view, who claim to be.
I'm a non-denominational Christian. I believe that anyone who believes that Jesus died and rose again for their sins is a Christian.
As simple as that. So it doesn't matter to you whether someone's a Catholic or a Mormon?
Well,
No.
I don't. Mormons don't believe what I just said. Mormons have a works theology. Catholics, there's a debate over whether Catholics have a works theology. Recently, Benedict has said no. So yeah, that's fine.
Am I allowed to ask, without cheating, to rephrase the question in a different way, very crisply?
Very crisply.
Suppose I was a baby being born in Saudi Arabia now. Would you wish me to be brought up as a Wahhabi or as an atheist?
Absolutely an atheist. I'm with you on that.
Good. Okay, thanks.
Wouldn't you?
Wouldn't I? Were you seriously asking me?
Second question. Please be brief.
Be brief.
Be brief. And for response, please be brief.
Oh, obviously.
You mentioned that you have all these moral issues with Christianity. Where do you get your morality from if we're just molecules in motion? What is morality?
Who says we're just molecules in motion?
You're a materialist. What else could you be?
We're fairly highly evolved primates who have an innate need for and recognition of human solidarity. You can call that morals if you wish. I think I would. It's only good people, but a lot of people, they say made in the image of God, are born as psychopaths and sociopaths. They don't feel this need. Indeed, they enjoy violating it. I don't know where that fits in, particularly to God's plan, but it's been put like this. Left to themselves, good people...
Ask David Wood. He's a diagnosed sociopath, and he's a very staunch Christian, and a better apologist than Frank Turek.
People will do as much good as they can. Wicked people will do as much ill as they can. If you want to get a good person to do an evil thing, you make him religious.
What do you mean by good? Where does good come from?
Dr. Turek, I believe that would be a third question, and we have two.
Well, it's...
So,
Same place
I'm
as
trying
your...
to get him to answer
My
the first
sail,
question.
sir, my sail is coming from the same place as your wind. My sail is just a bit more solid, that's all.
You don't want any of my wind.
I
I'm
would
from
politely
Jersey.
decline.
Mr. Hitchens, another question. Final question.
Is it not the case that the spread of Christianity, about which you spoke so warmly and affectingly in your opening remarks, attributing it to the innate truth of the Bible story, was spread by that means, or because the Emperor Constantine decided to make Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire? Which, in your view, contributed more to the spread of the faith?
The Holy Spirit.
I rest my case.
Thank you for that very brief answer. Now, we will turn the floor over to the audience, and I believe there are ushers in the room with microphones.
All right. That was bad. The Holy Spirit. Okay. That was bad. I don't even remember what Christopher Hitchens' first question was. I don't recall Frank Turek answering it. Neither one of them did very well in that little short Q&A. And I'm going to cut this short. Holy dog. We're at just under 3 hours. Good grief. No way. All right. 3 hours. This is surreal. To get through an hour and 15 minutes of debate. Gosh, I am not brief. Yeah, and holy smokes. All right. I've only been recording for 2 hours and 15 minutes. Well, that's a plus, I guess. Yeah. Gosh, Hitchens was way worse than I thought he was going to be. It's actually a little bit depressing. I kind of want to Wish I had done a different one. I thought about it. I actually come really close to doing a different debate than Hitchens because I didn't wanted to feel like I was dumping on the dead. Because Hitchens isn't around, and gosh, it may feel like that. But man, it was a lot of bad argument. It just was. It's like there are a lot of good criticisms of the Christian faith. There's a lot of atheists that ask questions that are hard to answer. And it's like, these are questions he asked are hard to answer in a live setting when you're on the spot and you don't have notes and you don't have the leisure of going back to a timestamp and rewatching something to kind of get your thoughts down. So I don't want to say I would say this like I would do better, because I wouldn't. But man, like I was really hoping for a better challenge. Like all of his bad arguments were so glaringly bad, and the few that he made that were good arguments didn't address the question. Like, Turk put out a ton of scientific fact, and Hitchens came back with a bunch of anecdotal, emotional gibberish. And a couple of good hard questions, but no actual counterpoints. Like they would have been good responses had those been the topics. But he didn't even stay on topic. He was all over the place. And he didn't address any of the issues. It's like, Frank Turek isn't the best at this. Every single time I watch one of his videos, I'm just like, I watch him interact all the time. Like I've seen several of his videos where he'll do these long presentations. He'll do like an hour-long presentation and like an hour and a half of Q&A, and I'll see him interact with these people in the audience, and I'll see people, just randos in the audience, ask him questions that he's got an answer for, but it's not a convincing answer. And it's like, he's just like, it's convincing if you already believe what he believes, but they're not convincing to people who don't think like him. And so I was really expecting that, but it's like he didn't even get a chance to screw up in that way, because Hitchens was so all over the place he couldn't even keep on topic. This wasn't as fun as I thought it was going to be 3 hours in. But anyway, hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you learned something. I'm going to post this on YouTube and see if anybody cares. Probably not.
Excellent.